Hello and welcome to Game 9 in the 2024 World Chess Championship. And today we have some extremely accurate chess. I'll show the accuracy rating after the game here. So right now, it looks like Gukesh has the white pieces. This is the 9th game, so only 5 more after this. And if it's still tied up after 14 games, then they will have a tiebreaker series. All right, d4. And now the response by the world champion is knight to f6, a flexible move, covering the center here and waiting to see what white does. So now we have c4. As this pawn cannot move forward to help control the center, the next best thing as far as a pawn move may be to bring this pawn up, helping control the d5 square. So the game continues with e6, unleashing the dark squared bishop, and maybe with an idea of pushing this pawn to d5 where it will be backed up by pawn and knight. So the game continues with g3. Okay, and now we have a Catalan opening. So let's see what happens next here. Bishop develops, targeting the king with check. So now Gukesh has a decision to make. What piece will he block with? As the king cannot move, so knight or bishop. And it looks like we have a bishop block here, which would be okay for Gukesh because this is a bad bishop that will be blocked in by his central pawn here, and especially if this pawn pushes up, that would really block in that bishop. So this is a good bishop here by the world champion. So let's see if he exchanges. No, he declines the trade here, dropping back, giving white time to develop, and the bishop grabs the long diagonal here, aiming up through the center and all the way to the queen side and the opponent's rook here. So we have d5 now, trying to fight for the center, and the game continues with knight developing and white is ready to castle. Now this pawn is unprotected here, but if that pawn were to be captured, it would pull this more valuable central pawn off to the side. So the game continues with castling by black and castling by white. Both kings are safer now, and the rooks are closer to the center where they can more easily develop and influence the game. So we have c6 here, fortifying this d5 pawn. So this pawn triangle is pretty solid here. Black does have a blocked in bad bishop here. So that will be something that will have to be figured out as the game progresses, what to do with that bad bishop. So queen develops to c2 here, protecting the pawn, eyeing the center of the board and black's king side over here. So the game continues with knight developing and rook centralizing here, helping to fortify this pawn on d4 in case there's an exchange, and there could be future pressure on that pawn. So now we have b6, and this gives black the option to either fianchetto the bishop here, or maybe more likely putting the bishop here, lining up on this pawn. So the game continues with interesting move here, bishop to c3. Generally you don't want to move pieces twice in the opening, but I guess that bishop was blocking the knight if the knight plans to go here. A lot of times the knight would end up moving to c3. So an interesting decision here by the young challenger. This does protect this central pawn and also line up on the king side here. So the game continues with a maybe safer, more passive move. Well, not too passive. This bishop is aiming down here towards the king side. Maybe there will be a fight amongst these bishops for this long diagonal. But at the moment, this bishop is just blocked in by its own pawns. So the game continues with knight developing and queen also getting off the back rank, connecting the rooks. So the final piece that was not developed yet, rook on a1, centralizes, creating a battery, lining up on the queen here. So the game continues with rook centralizing. And now we have a pawn push on the queen side. The computer says this is the best move for white. And white has a slight edge of 0.26, about the equivalent of a quarter of a pawn here. So let's see what happens next. Well, we have a pawn push by the world champion. So a lot of tension building up here around these pawns. Now the bishop is a little more open here. So the game continues with a capture towards the center, which is generally better than capturing away from the center if this pawn would have captured. Pawn captures, and now the queen creates a battery. We have queen and bishop lining up on the king side. So the game continues with knight developing, blocking the line of the queen on that bishop. You know, maybe a future attack on this open B file. So bishop develops, pinning the knight. Usually a good strategy. Line up on the more valuable pieces. So the bishop is targeting the queen and pinning this knight to the queen. So we have an exchange here, a further exchange of pawns, and the game continues with knight capture. Adding more pressure to that pinned knight, and the bishop knocks out the other knight here, getting rid of a defender of this valuable central pawn. And so the game continues with the best move being found by the young challenger. He captures, attacking the queen here, deciding to possibly give up his bishop pair. So how will the game continue? Well, we have a capture towards the center and recapture of this bishop. Now the rook is under attack. So the rook steps forward, perhaps getting ready in the future to double up rooks or even triple up with rook, queen, and rook all on this half-open file, targeting this weak, isolated pawn. That's a possibility in the future. So the queen steps forward, leaving this pawn unprotected. Of course, if it is captured by the rook, there's a possibility of the queen capturing here. What will be the response of the world champion? And this is the first inaccuracy in the game on move 20 here. And, so far, very accurate play by both sides. And the game continues with the rook capturing, going ahead in material by one pawn. And the knight captures here. The best move in the position being found by Gukesh. So the game continues with a battery of rook and queen being created here, and the game continues with the queen dropping back to b1, the best move according to the computer. How will things continue? Let's find out. We have the rook pinning the knight, to the queen here. So, that looks a little bit dangerous, but according to the computer, the game is almost dead even here. White has just a slight edge. So the game continues with a capture here, protecting the knight along with the queen. And now we have Rook adding more pressure, so the pressure is building here. All these pieces are attacking, but of course, if a rook captures, you would get, after this recapture, an exchange of rook for knight and pawn. Okay, the game continues with the queen pressing forward, and now we have bishop capturing, queen capturing, and now after this recapture, if we look at the material after the dust settles here, it looks like material is even. We have bishop versus knight, which that's usually not as big a deal if there are only pawns on one side of the board. Now, if there were pawns on both sides, the bishop would be a slight edge or an advantage because the bishop can more easily get back and forth across the board. So we exchange down to queens. The rook recaptured, doubling the rooks up, creating a battery on the b file. And now rook attacks rook, backed up by the bishop here. Will we have a further exchange of material? Yes. The best move, according to the computer, is to capture, and the game is almost dead even. So it looks like we're headed towards a draw, but let's see. We have a pawn pushing forward, gaining space. The king steps forward, usually a good strategy in the endgame, especially when there are not very many pieces on the board. A king can make all the difference. So, attack on the pawn here that is unprotected. The king steps over to defend this pawn, and now we have black, the world champion, pushing his king forward, trying to get it into the action. And also getting that king off of the light squares. And that's another strategy. You can place your pawns and pieces on the opposite colored squares of your opponent's bishop. So, the knight and rook we see are already on the dark squares. That way there are no surprises from the light squared bishop. So the game continues with a pawn push, and the world champion follows suit, gaining space on the king side. Rook grabbing the open A file. A lot of times this is a good strategy, moving your rook as far away from the enemy king as possible. That way the king will not be able to harass it in the endgame. So rook steps to the C file, targeting the bishop, and the bishop just moves over here, getting out of the line of fire. And so at the same time, the bishop is protecting this pawn along with the king, and another attack on that bishop. So retreat, the bishop grabs this diagonal, aiming up here through to the king side, and the game continues with a knight retreating back, getting ready to reposition, probably for an attack on the bishop here. So the game continues with this f4 move, preventing the knight from pressing forward and attacking the bishop here. So the game continues with an exchange of pawns, and now both sides are left with weak, isolated pawns on the H file. All right, the game continues with the rook lining up on that unprotected pawn there. So how will Gukesh respond? Well, he just finds the best move according to the computer, pressing his king forward. Here, there's an option, as well to protect this pawn. Let's see how the game continues. Knight jumps forward, putting pressure on the bishop. So the king just runs up here to aid in the defense of this bishop that's under fire by rook and knight. All right, so we have an exchange here, more material flying off the board after the recapture. Now Gukesh is left with an isolated pawn. So he has 3 isolated pawns, 3 pawn islands here versus only 2 by his opponent. So it may be harder to defend these pawns. Let's see what happens. So the game continues with the rook grabbing the 7th rank, preventing the king from stepping back, maybe with the threat of moving over here, targeting this pawn. So the king centralizes, where it can come to the defense of this pawn, but still may be able to come back to this pawn. So the game continues with the rook getting behind the passed pawn. And so now we have rook to a3 defending, not wanting to give up an important pawn in the center here. So the king is stepping forward to join the action. And now black has a slight edge here. And white continues with a waiting move, just stepping the rook over, maintaining the defense of this pawn. And so now we have f6, pressing forward here. Perhaps with an idea of pushing a pawn. If there's a recapture, then recapture, that is one possibility. So the game continues with another waiting move, rook to a3. The king steps forward to join the action. And now we have a check, trying to drive that king back. A block and exchange of pawns here. After a capture with check, we have an attack on the king. Another pawn comes off the board. But after this capture and recapture, it's looking like a draw here. So let's check out the final moves. We have the king heading over to defend against this passed pawn and maybe attack the rook at the same time. This rook has to watch out that it is not trapped. So we have pawn pressing forward, king attacking the rook, and check. So now the king steps in front of the passed pawn, but at the same time, the rook is blocking out this king. So the king will not be able to aid in the promotion of this pawn. And it's looking pretty much like a draw here. So after a few more moves, now, it could be a little bit tricky for the average player, but world championship players, they know how to finish out the game here and avoid general mistakes. So we have a draw here after 54 moves. So game 9 is drawn. There will be a rest day tomorrow, so no world championship game tomorrow. And then after the rest day, I believe 3 more days of games in a row before one more rest day and a final 2 days in a row, for those final 2 games. So after 9 games, everything is drawn. Oh, and I wanted to look at the game review to show you the accuracy. Check this out. 98.7% accuracy by Gukesh and 98.8% by Ding. The game was almost dead even the whole way through here. So now we have one brilliant move by Gukesh, one great move apiece by each player, and no mistakes, no misses, no blunders. And it looks like, one inaccuracy by Gukesh here. So, incredible accuracy by both players. And we have a draw. And it looks like 3,000 rating level is what Gukesh played at. And the world champion played at a 2950 rating level. And if I move my image here, you can see it's pretty impressive. So look here. Give me 1 second. All right. So now you can see 3,000 rating level is what the challenger played at, 2950 by the world champion. In the opening, 98.9% accuracy by Gukesh, 99% accuracy by the world champion. And then in the middle game, 97.4 by Gukesh, and 97.9 by the world champion. And then in the end game, 99.1 for the challenger and 99.1 for the world champion. So incredibly accurate play today. I hope you enjoyed this and are looking forward, as I am, to the future games. All right, well, feel free to leave comments at any time. Like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.